Welcome back to another impactful episode of the PSTA podcast. This is Craig King, your favorite and only host with your favorite guest for the past few years, Patrick Kelly.
Glad to be here.
What's going on, man?
Not much. I'm firmly in the wait till next year cycle of Bills fandom. This is
You beat me to it. You ruined my joke.
Well, sorry. I mean, at this point, you just kind of accept it.
Yeah, and you knew it was coming. Right?
Yeah, you do. You do.
But to any other Bills fans out there, I feel your pain, but at least you made it, which is also the worst thing you can tell a fan of a team that's gotten put out of the
I don't want to
playoffs.
hear anything out of a Niners fan about you feel my pain. You can go console yourself with your Super Bowl trophies.
Yeah,
we'll console ourselves with nothing.
We do have 5 of them.
Yeah.
Quest for 6. But that's not why our faithful guests are joining us today to hear us talk about football.
Thank goodness.
However, Patrick, what is your favorite Super Bowl snack?
Ooh. I mean, that's tough. I've got to have chicken wings during the Super Bowl. That's essential, and I need some sort of cheesy dip.
We are twins.
Yeah, don't come at me with the salsa or the guac.
No,
I need
I don't
cheese.
want any of that. No, wings for me. Probably my dad's famous wings, which I can't tell you what's in them, but they're really
but
good.
I've eaten them, and they are excellent.
They're pretty good. And some type of Rotel dip with spicy sausage.
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, I think that's what we're going to have.
Yeah, so good podcast. We're going to wrap this up and go eat.
Yeah, we're already 2 minutes in talking about everything except for policy. So let's jump right into it, Patrick. We are I think, approaching week 4 of the legislative session.
Yes.
Something like
week
that.
4.
And been quite the activity already. But a bill that we talked about last time that educators have been hoping to see that didn't cross the finish line last year, which is the Educator Assistance Act.
Yeah. So this is something that PSTA members have asked about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, after the first week of session, I got emails and text messages and phone calls asking, well, what about the Educator Assistance Act? And I was like, it's this first week, it's coming. And true to her word, Chair Lady Shannon Erickson and House K-12 Subcommittee Chair Jeff Bradley have got this bill queued up and ready to go. Now, one important piece of context for people that are going to be tracking this bill is in the prior General Assembly, it was H 4280. H 4280 is not a thing anymore. It is now H 3196. So it's like the prince of legislation. We're going to rebrand it, rename it.
Yeah.
Nobody got that reference unless they are as old as we are, but
that's
okay.
Pretty good reference.
So H 3196 is up this week in the K-12 subcommittee. This is a top priority for PSTA during this session because we firmly believe that this is a bill with about 10 different policies in it, so it's a comprehensive bill. We don't think any single one of these policies really moves heaven and earth, but we think taken collectively, it has the potential to significantly improve teacher working conditions in a couple of different ways.
Yeah, and improved working conditions, I would assume and be bold enough to say, would probably help with teacher retention.
Yeah, I mean, that's the goal here. In 2023, the General Assembly created a statewide teacher recruitment and retention task force. That task force met for almost an entire year. It held 3 different listening sessions across the state. It got hundreds, if not thousands, of emails and communications from teachers. And consistently, teachers talked about non-instructional burdens that were driving them or their colleagues out of the profession. The task force came out with a set of recommendations, and a lot of the policy concepts in the Educator Assistance Act are directly from that teacher task force report. And the ones that are not directly from the report, I would argue, is a good example of Chair Lady Erickson being directly responsive to the voice of teachers, both in talking to the task force and what she's heard over her years working in the education policy space.
And before we move on, Patrick, last year's General Assembly, last session or the end of last session and this year's General Assembly, the makeup is a little different, right? Yeah. And so when we look at these kind of micro accomplishments within this bill that we think will benefit teachers as a whole, I don't really see anything that I feel is controversial that we don't have broad support like we did last year. Do you?
No, I think the one thing that's important for educators to remember about this bill is that not every member of the General Assembly is an educator. And so there are things in this bill that if you don't understand how the teaching profession works in this state, I cannot fault a legislator for looking at it and going, what's the big deal about this? Or even thinking that it might be a negative thing. So let me give you two easy examples. The first is the bill would create a permanent certification pathway for current educators, that you wouldn't have to go through the rigmarole of every 5 years submitting documentation of 120 hours of professional credit to keep your certificate current. If someone doesn't understand how certificate renewal goes, they could look at that and go, wait a second, teachers don't want to do professional development? That's not good. And PSTA agrees. Teachers should do high-quality professional development. But you can do that without having to submit the documentation every 5 years that you did the thing. The other thing that's a good example is the bill would require districts to include a proposed minimum salary schedule with teacher contracts when they go out on May 1st, but in early May have to be due by May 11th. And again, if you're not a teacher, you might look at that and go, well, what's the big deal there? Of course teachers know what they're getting paid. Well, no, they don't. No, like every other profession has this just incredibly crazy concept that a contract for employment includes a salary figure.
Yeah.
Well, that's not true of teachers in South Carolina, and I hope educators can realize you can't fault a legislator for not knowing that unless somebody shares it with them. So what I would encourage our members to do as this bill works through the House and when it hopefully gets to the Senate, where this is, as we've said on a prior podcast, it is a record number of new senators this year.
Yeah.
You can't take it for granted that they understand the current lay of the land of teacher working conditions. You have to explain what the conditions are so that they can see the benefit and the necessity for the actions laid out in the Educator Assistance Act.
Yeah, perfectly explained, Patrick. And you know, I'll add to that before we move on. Extend some grace to these policymakers, especially those that are brand new, that are learning how to navigate their roles, and as Patrick alluded to, many of them not being educators, and so use this as an opportunity to educate them and explain to them why this bill will be beneficial to you and how it's going to positively impact you. So something else I saw on your land last week, Patrick, was the work experience credit, Senate Bill 78, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So this is another renaming. So maybe Kanye is more relevant than Prince, maybe not. I don't know. So yet another, the artist formerly known as S305
there you go.
is now S78. And it is a bill from Senator Tom Young down in Aiken that would simply make educators eligible for related occupational experience credit on their teaching certificate. So the example we've used for the last 2 years is you work in a science lab for 5 years, you've got a bachelor's degree, you decide, you know what, I want to be a teacher. Well, currently, you go get your teacher certification and you're going to start at step 0 on the salary schedule because you're a brand new teacher. That's not a terribly powerful recruitment incentive for someone to leave the private sector with 5 years experience, and maybe they're making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, and then they look at starting teacher pay and they go, nope, not doing that.
Right.
So this is common sense. This was called for in the Teacher Recruitment and Retention Task Force report. It would make us, I believe, the 4th state in the nation to require this statewide by law. But what's notable is one of the 3 states that currently have it is North Carolina. So you can talk about competing with your neighbors.
Sure. Yeah.
This is one of those instances. So this bill was set for a hearing by the Senate Education Committee on January 22nd. It was going to skip the subcommittee process altogether because the Senate passed it last go-round, and Senator Hembry, as chair of education, believes it is ready for prime time in the full education committee because of all the vetting it got last go-round. But that committee hearing got snowed out. Pretty much everything that week got snowed out.
Yeah.
So that bill will be up. I've checked with Senate Education staff. That'll be up on February 22nd or February 12th. February 12th in the Senate Education Committee. We expect it to move, but PSTA will be advocating, and hundreds of our members have already sent emails asking for that bill to move.
Yeah. And just like anything else, we make it really easy for you to advocate via our Legislative Alert Network and our 1 Minute Advocacy that we send out on Sundays. So I think the last thing that I want to make note of in this episode, Patrick, is Senate Bill 62, Education Savings Accounts, also known as vouchers.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and some senators actually slipped during floor debate and called it a voucher bill, even though they were the same ones that had said it's an education scholarship account bill. So, again, another example of we can't decide on a name for something. But the bill has received second reading in the Senate. We're recording this on Monday, February 3rd. So last Thursday, the Senate gave it third reading. I think the final vote was 32-12 or something of that nature. It passed pretty easily. On Tuesday, February 4th, it'll get a symbolic third reading in the Senate and then head over to the House. The bill, in terms of general policy concept, is reflective of what it was when Senator Hembry introduced it at the start of session. It would fund education scholarship accounts not out of general fund revenues, but out of the lottery account. And the idea there is that will address the state Supreme Court saying that public monies cannot be expended for the direct benefit of private schools. And this is just kind of an interesting thing, especially if you're a government teacher like me. That section of the state constitution that says no direct benefit for public schools, well, there's another section that creates the lottery, and the lottery section of the Constitution says that the lottery funds are allowed to be spent on, quote, educational purposes. But it doesn't define what educational purposes. So the theory of action here is that educational purposes could encompass private school tuition as well, and it would be allowable. So that gets interesting. So the core of the bill is the same, but there were some significant amendments. The most significant that I think are worth noting is that the bill originally proposed extending the eligibility criteria based on income from 400% of poverty, which is about $127,000 for a family of four, to 600% of poverty, which is about $187,000 for a family of four. That's allegedly, according to Senate floor debate, about 85 to 90% of families in South Carolina at 600% of poverty. So it's pretty close to universal eligibility. The Senate rolled that back to 400% at max implementation. So it remains under their version more of a lower or middle income bill than it would have been. The other significant thing that I would point out is it did have some policy upgrades, especially in some amendments offered by Senator Massey, Senator Devine, Senator Jackson. They reintroduced the non-discrimination language that's in the current law. They are going to require background checks to be documented for individuals that are education service providers receiving ESA funds. Even something as simple as Senator Devine got an amendment through that would require an education service provider to have an actual functioning website that the public could look at. So some little things like that. But the bill now goes over to the House, where it gets interesting because last year the House passed a universal ESA bill, meaning no income cap and no numbers cap. The Senate bill caps the number of annual ESAs at 15,000 per year max. The House last year passed a bill that would have just handed out an ESA to anybody that applied for one. So there's some differences there in policy, and it'll be interesting to see what happens now that it moves over.
Yeah, and I think we'll see the difference in thought process in both chambers, but we expect some version of it to pass the House more than likely, or?
Yeah, both the Senate and House majority caucuses, which are strongly Republican in both chambers, they have a supermajority in both chambers. Their start of session policy agendas they put out both had reinstituting educational scholarship accounts for private school tuition as a top goal.
Yeah. So to learn more about it, please take a look at Patrick's last email. I think it was the week 3 recap, where he actually has a chart within the email that kind of breaks down what the policy, what this bill had in last year, and then what it has, any changes for this session. So take a look at that, and also really easy mechanism for you to contact your elected officials on that. Anything else before we wrap up today? I have a few things I want to share with our good friends out there.
No, share away. I feel like I've talked enough.
All right, good deal. So speaking of, being able to use your voices, also in addition to our Legislative Alert Network, we are kicking off our Legislative Hill Days tomorrow. We have our Palmetto State Schools counselors coming tomorrow, and then we have Anderson 1 Teacher Forum, and then Darlington coming this week. And so we're excited to have over 20 Legislative Hill Days this session. Also, any teachers interested in a very fun, I'm just going to use the word fun.
Yeah, why not?
Thinking of a big educational word, but I'm just going to say fun. Professional learning experience. We have Ed Camp Palmetto happening on March 1st on the beautiful campus of Charleston Southern University, so you can register for that. It's free of charge. I am currently looking at, and Patrick can confirm this, a room full of door prizes, and there might be a basketball signed by a very famous basketball coach here in this state. That may be one of the door prizes.
Like potentially the GOAT could have signed a basketball?
Probably the GOAT.
Okay. That narrows it down in basketball in the state.
In South Carolina. And finally, we have 2 more sessions of our trauma-informed professional learning series, with our next session happening on Tuesday, February 11th. So sign up for that if you're interested in that, with our partnership with Columbia College. We're so excited about this legislative session. You get stuck with me and Patrick all session, so I apologize for that. But good luck to your team, whoever you're pulling for the Super Bowl. If it's not the Eagles, then I hope your team loses. I'm just going to say that.
I'm just ready for baseball season.
Yeah, let's go with baseball. All right, it's been another impactful episode of the PSTA podcast. I'm Craig King, your host. We'll see you next time.